So good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Ministry of the Economy and Lux Innovation, welcome to this informative webinar regarding temporary aid schemes for the transition to a net zero economy, which is based on the law of the 3rd of July 2025. Our speaker today is Raphael Vertommen from the Ministry of the Economy. I am Laurie Ensch, working at Lux Innovation, and I will be moderating today's session. For the agenda of today's webinar, we will start with an introduction to the legal framework and the objectives. We will then go over the call for projects for the electrification of industrial production processes, which is really the aim of today. We will go over also the templates that need to be filled out and the submission process, and then we will end with a Q&A session. Feel free to write your questions at any time during the presentation using the questions tabs that should be located on the right corner of your screen. I would also like to inform you that this webinar is being recorded and the replay and the slides will be made available afterwards to you during this week. And so with that, we can start the first chapter, which will be the legal framework and the objectives. As I mentioned, a new law came into force on the 3rd of July this year, which establishes temporary aid schemes to support the transition to a net zero emissions economy. The objectives of this law are to, on one hand, help reach carbon neutrality by 2050, and on the other hand, to decarbonize Luxembourg's manufacturing industry. And to achieve this, there is, on one hand, a competitive call for projects, which is open until the 31st of October 2025 at 12 p.m. And this is a competitive aid scheme for the electrification of industrial production processes. On the other hand, there's also a non-competitive investment aid for investments in strategic sectors that support the transition to a net zero emissions economy. Here, the deadline to submit your application is until the 15th of October this year at 12 p.m. And what is also important to know is that both aid schemes cannot be combined, and the ministry needs to grant the aids until end of this year, the 31st of December. Today's focus of the webinar will be the competitive call for projects. If you have any questions regarding the investment aid, please feel free to reach out to us at Lux Innovation. Our contact details will be shown at the end of the presentation at the last slide. And yes, with that being said, I will now hand over to Raphael Vertommen from the Ministry of the Economy.
Thank you, Laurie, for your introduction to the topic of this webinar, which concerns the call for projects aimed at electrifying industrial manufacturing processes. This is a competitive call for projects that the Ministry has actively promoted over the past 2 years through various consultations, the most recent of which took place from March to April 2025. A preliminary version of the specifications was made available to companies during the consultation period, and its content has remained largely unchanged since then. Nevertheless, I will go over the key aspects of the call and take a bit more time to explain certain points in detail. So, what is this call for projects about? It is a competitive tender that is open for a limited period from August 22nd to October 31st. The budget allocated for this call is directly based on the results of the latest consultation. The government has earmarked a total of 132 million euro. Eligible costs include CapEx investments that enable your company to reach the required level of decarbonisation, and operational costs, such as the additional cost of energy. A new feature compared to the preliminary specifications is that equipment leasing contracts are now also accepted. The conditions for leasing contracts are detailed in the official specifications. For projects selected under this call, part of the financial support, 45% of the CapEx, will be dispersed immediately after the equipment is commissioned. The remaining amount will be paid in 10 equal installments, provided the yearly decarbonization targets are met. Companies have 36 months from the date of grant approval to commission the installations. Penalties will be applied if deadlines are not met. To stay informed about updates related to this call, I recommend subscribing to the distribution list by sending an email to decarbonisation@eco.eta.lu. How are projects selected? This is a competitive process. Projects are in direct competition with one another. The key criterion used to rank submissions is the total amount of aid requested divided by the quantity of CO2 equivalent avoided over a 10-year period. Projects that require the least amount of aid per ton of CO2 reduced will be prioritized until the budget is exhausted. If the budget is not fully allocated, a competitiveness clause will be applied. To determine the amount of aid to request, we recommend that companies use the funding gap method. As part of their submission documents, companies are required to provide a business plan, which allows us to verify the assumptions and assess the plausibility of the requested aid amounts. Which companies are eligible for this call for projects? All manufacturing companies classified under Section C of the NAS code are targeted by this call. Naturally, the investments must take place within Luxembourg. Several standard conditions related to state aid regulations apply, including holding all necessary permits and authorizations, not being an undertaking in difficulty, and most importantly, complying with the incentive effect requirements. The project must enable a reduction of at least 40% in direct greenhouse gas emissions from installations currently using fossil fuels, achieved through electrification. This reduction must be maintained annually and will be verified each year. The annual payment tranche will be disbursed after verification that this criterion has been met. The baseline for calculating emission reductions will be the average emissions over the past 5 years. For companies covered under the EU emissions trading system, the reduction must fall below the benchmarks used for free allocation of allowances. Importantly, the project must not simply bring the company into compliance with existing EU standards, nor should it result in an increase in production capacity. A tolerance of up to 2% is permitted. I'm also including in this presentation the various links to the specifications document, the application forms, and the official portal page. A number of documents must be submitted as part of the application. The first is the application form, a template provided by the ministry that summarizes the project. I will go over this document later in the presentation. Next, we require a detailed description of the electrification project. No template is provided for this document, so companies are free to draft it in their own format. However, it must cover the following key points. Proof that the minimum size of the technical unit is met. Demonstration of the technical feasibility of the project. Evidence of the targeted level of decarbonization as defined in Chapter 3.5. Effective from the commissioning of the installation or equipment, including detailed calculations of historical and projected emissions, along with supporting documentation. Confirmation that the current industrial installation complies with the applicable EU standards. A detailed list of equipment included in the investment project. For companies covered by the EU ETS, proof that the project will reduce CO2 equivalent emissions below the benchmark for free quota allocation. Additionally, the following documents must be submitted a business plan illustrating the company's calculations leading to the requested aid amount. It must cover at least 10 years of subsidized operations and include all necessary elements for calculating the funding gap. In excess, detailed projected expenses and revenues. A detailed cost estimate for the installation equipment, a self-declaration of existing funding sources, including any other national or EU aid received. In case of equipment leasing, a draft unsigned leasing contract must be provided, including a mandatory buyout clause at the end of the lease and an amortization schedule. If available, a draft power purchase agreement related to the electrification project, identification of the company and its group's structure, in excess the single economy entity to which the company belongs, presented as an organizational chart, official annual financial statements of the company, its linked and partner enterprises, or consolidated group accounts for the last 2 closed financial years, bank account details, and a copy of a signature mandate if the person submitting the application is not authorized to legally bind the company. Now I will walk you through the aid application form, which must be submitted along with your proposal. Oops. Here we go. The first section of the form is fairly standard. It requires the contact details of the person authorized to legally bind the company, the main contact person for the project, and the identification details of the company. The second section of the form focuses on the project itself. General information is requested, such as the project title, a brief description, the project address, whether the project involves full or partial decarbonisation, and whether the installation is covered under the EU emissions trading systems. Further details about the industrial process are also required. The unit linked to the production volume, example tons per year, the theoretical capacity of the targeted installation or process, historical annual volumes from 2020 to 2024, and projected volumes for the 10 years of operation. Applicants must provide both historical and projected greenhouse gas emissions. The form automatically calculates the absolute and the relative annual reduction. A negative value indicates a reduction, while a positive value indicates an increase. You must also specify the project start date and the commissioning date of the installation. The form is interactive, allowing you to add rows for investment costs. The total investment amount must be entered manually in the field above the table. The funding gap derived from the business plan should be entered in the field below the table. The next section concerns the financing of the investment costs. You must indicate equity contributions, bank loans, and European funding sources, if applicable. It is important that the total amount entered in this section matches the total investment costs listed in the previous table. The total field is used later in the form for automatic calculations. You can also indicate whether you have received support from Luxembourg. Section 3 is the most critical part of the form. Here, you must enter the total amount of aid requested over 10 years for the project. This amount should, in principle, be identical to the funding gap provided earlier. The 3 fields that follow are automatically calculated based on the data entered in previous sections. It is therefore essential to complete all parts of the form accurately, otherwise the data in section 3 will be incorrect. Section 4 lists all the documents to be attached to the application. I have already reviewed this part earlier. Section 5 contains the declaration of owner and the signature of the applicant. And in this slide, I would like to show you the recommended structure for business plan. This is based on the simplified example provided during the consultation phase. In the example, the rows are divided into 3 sections. The first one, avoided operational costs. This includes costs that the project helped eliminate. A typical line item here would be the avoided fossil fuel cost. This value should be positive. Then second, incurred operational costs. This includes new costs introduced by the project. For example, the additional electricity cost should be listed here. These values should be negative. And then third, investment costs. These are the capital expenditures related to the project and should also be negative. The columns are split into 2 parts. The first part covers the implementation years of the project, where most investment costs should appear. The second part covers the 10 years of operation, where avoided and incurred operational costs should be listed. Ultimately, the business plan should help the company determine the amount of aid needed to implement the decarbonisation project. We do not require companies to use a specific template. They must submit their own file, but it must be clear, detailed, and include the assumptions used in the calculations. Unfortunately, we were not able to set up a MyGuichet submission procedure in time. In the meantime, an alternative system has been put in place. Companies must upload their application via a secure state-provided link. To receive this link, the company must contact the ministry by email at least 1 week before the submission deadline. To generate the link, we require an email address and a mobile phone number of the person who will upload the application. The ministry will send a secure upload link no later than 3 days before the deadline. The application must be submitted by October 31st before noon. We are still working on implementing the MyGuichet procedure. If the process changes and moves to MyGuichet platform, registered participants on the distribution list will be notified. That brings us to the final slide of the presentation. Let's now take some time to review and address any questions you may have.
Yes, exactly. So thank you for this presentation, Rafael. For everyone, please feel free to write your questions in the questions tabs, which should be located on the right side of your screen. There was one question, which was to know if the presentation will be made available. So indeed, you will receive a link via email to the recording and the slides in the next few days, so you can rewatch everything. And if you have follow-up questions, you can also send them to us via email afterwards, but we will maybe wait a few minutes to see if other questions will come in. Okay, so there was a question. It's related to the payment terms, especially the payment terms for the CAPEX subsidy. So Section 8 says 45% are paid after the spend, let's say in year +1, and the remaining 55% are paid with OPEX over 10 years of operations. The cash flow is consequently really penalizing for the business, as we would finally recuperate the cash after 10 years of OPS. Is there a way to recuperate the capex faster earlier? This could be a game changer to get the internal approval.
There is the only way I see for business not to spend the capex immediately is then to switch to a leasing contract. This is a new feature that we have, which was addressed by several companies, and that we are accepting. We have changed the specifications, and we are accepting now. But if the company is doing the investment by itself, no, there's no other way to recuperate the capex earlier. So it's 40, like you mentioned, it's 45% during implementation time, and then the remaining 55% are paid with the OPEX or with this 10-year installments.
Okay, thank you for the explanation, Raphael. I hope this made it clearer. Are there other questions, maybe? We will wait a moment to see if other questions are coming in.
And if you have questions after this webinar, do not hesitate to contact Lux Innovation or the ministry with the email address that was mentioned earlier, decarbonation@eco-etat.lu.
So I see an additional question came in. Two questions, actually. First one, the webinar focuses solely on form. Is there a place where specific technical ideas could be suggested? These ideas could lead to a certain association between partners.
So, I mean, in terms of technical, the specifications of this call are quite, let's say, in my opinion, straightforward. We are aiming at decarbonisation projects with the substitution of fossil fuels to electrification, with a decrease of direct carbon, the CO2 emissions of at least 40%. So if you have a process in your manufacturing line where you can reduce these 40%, that's the call is eligible. We will not give example. We're not planning to give examples of project. But I'm not sure if I understood your questions correctly.
Yeah, so please feel free to follow up over writing here in the tab, or send us also an email afterwards. Otherwise, I would go to the next question, because a few questions are now coming in. So the next question is, if could we have clarity over the capacity increase limitation? Capacity is defined as production of the last 5 years instead of the installed capacity. How to plan for future sales growth?
So in the application form, we are asking the theoretical capacity of a production line and also the 5 years. But to check the capacity increase, we will look at the theoretical capacity of the line. The 5 years is to give us an indication of how much the company has produced the years before. But this is unfortunately this is a strict condition coming from the EU Commission. We personally would like to have it to have a bit more flexibility in terms of capacity increase, but this is a strict rule coming from the TCTF framework.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is with regard to section 4.1, sorry. So each offer is related to one single project. In our case, we have several sub-projects that have to be combined to reach the 40%. Our assumption is that this is considered as a single project submission. Would this work?
Yeah, this is difficult to answer here in this webinar. I think we should maybe get in touch and see your project more specifically, because I cannot tell you here right now if it is considered as a single project submission or not.
Okay, and then the final question at the moment, but again, please feel free everyone to add more questions. So will you define a weighted average cost of capital and energy cost to be used in the business plan?
No, the WACC companies should use their own WACC, so weighted average cost of capital, and energy cost we will also not define. So this is up to companies. I mean, bigger companies compared to smaller companies have different energy costs. So this has to come from the companies in their they have to define it in their business plan and take some assumptions, because yeah, unfortunately I cannot see into the future if energy prices will increase or decrease. So this is unfortunately, it's a competitive bidding here, so you can take some assumptions and yeah, take some margins with your energy costs. It shouldn't be exaggerated, but it's okay if you take some margins there.
Okay. Then we have another question that came in. Should we add weighted average cost of capital to the CapEx investment for the subsidy?
For the subsidy, I'm not sure to understand the question correctly. Should we add WACC to the CapEx investment?
Yes, maybe.
For me, it's rather simple. For the business plan, do the business plan in a way that you feel comfortable. If you say, okay, I need this amount of money over the 10 years of operations plus the maximum 3 years of commissioning. This is the amount of money that is needed for this project, for us to do this project. The company, I mean, bigger companies need to get the approval from maybe from headquarters or from their top management. So you have to feel comfortable, but as already mentioned, it's a competitive bidding. So your project will be in competition with other projects.
So there was some more information added to that question.
Yeah.
Will the interest on our capital be paid back by the subsidy?
So the interest for if it's a cost, you can put it in the business plan. So if you have a cost, it will not be paid in with the 45% capex, because the 45% capex that we pay after, or let's say during and shortly after commissioning, is only on investment expenses that company had, but you can add them to the OpEx side of the help. So it will be part of the 10 installments. Yeah, in the 10 installments.
Okay. Okay, yes. So there's no other question at the moment. There was one comment also to the question we had previously. It's just that if we all use our own estimates, then our calculated deficits and requested aid will not be comparable.
Yeah, the for us the criterion to compare the projects is really the amount of aid requested divided by the emissions reduction in tons of CO2 equivalent. So the idea we will prioritize. Yeah, prioritize. Thank you. The project asking the least amount of money. So
okay,
it's a competitive bidding. So it's up to the companies to see the level they are, yeah, the risk they want to take, and yeah, it's not. I know it's not an easy task to the energy costs and so on to define them. It's not easy, but we will not take the responsibility for this. This is up to the company, and then we will compare the projects with the amount of aid requested per ton of CO2 reduced.
Okay. So another question just came in. If we would use more CO2 than 40%, will we get more subsidy? We will submit the case for 40% reduction only.
So if you are reducing more than 40, it's the ratio, the criterion 8 divided by amount of CO2, it's the absolute amount of CO2. So if you are reducing more CO2 in terms of absolute amount, let's say the ratio will reduce. So you can ask more money theoretically, which also makes sense, because if you're reducing more CO2, maybe you need more equipment, more power. So the costs are also higher. Also, if you compare cost of natural gas versus electricity, currently electricity is more expensive than natural gas. So it's normal to have higher costs and asking for a higher amount of aid.
Okay, thank you. And then another question, what is the total envelope allocated for this call for project?
So the total amount foreseen is 132 million euros.
Okay. At the moment, there is no other question, but we still have a few minutes left. So I would suggest that we wait in case other questions come in. And if not, we will finish here, but let's wait a few minutes. And as I mentioned also, in case anyone has follow-up questions afterwards, we will provide you with the recording, the slides, and there will be also our contact details. So you can always reach out to us via email afterwards. Okay, another question came in. 45% can be paid earlier than after installation. What are the criteria?
I think I don't remember if we wrote, I think 2 times per year, but we are only paying when you have des factures.
Bills.
Yeah, after you have bills and you have proof of payments. So when you have paid, for example, if you have a project, the commissioning of your installation takes 2 years, you will not pay everything at the end, so you will have intermediate payments. And I think I have to double check in the specifications. I think it was twice per year you can ask for payments.
Okay, I hope this answers that question. Okay, yes, I think then we will conclude here. So as I mentioned a few times now, we will send you the recording, the slides. You can always contact us afterwards via email. I hope this was helpful. Thank you very much, Raphael, for the presentation and also answering all the questions that came in. Thank you for all the participants, and I wish everyone a very nice day.
Thank you, Laurie. Thank you to all of you. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.